Students in the Boston Public Schools will soon be starting a new year, so it's time for an update on what's ahead and some tips for parents. Our guest is with an organization that helps keep students on track. She's also chair of the Education Committee for the Boston NAACP and co-chair of Boston's first task force on the achievement gap. I'd like to welcome the Executive Director of Build Greater Boston, Ayele Shakur. Thank you very much for being with us, Ayele.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
First of all, talk about the new leadership that we have in place right now for the Boston Public Schools. What's your experience with that?
Well, I'm excited about Dr. Tommy Chang, who's the new superintendent for the Boston Public Schools. I actually had the honor of being on the superintendent search committee. So early on, just looking at the field of candidates, Dr. Chang just stood out far and above. One thing we have in common is both having taught originally in Compton, California, and just really just looking at his background coming out of Compton, being a teacher who's experienced charter schools but has a real passion and commitment for traditional public school education. I think he's the right leader for this time in Boston. And I think, you know, with the mayor's office, we have a new mayor, we have a new chief of education in the mayor's office. I think we just have the right team in place for this year.
He's inheriting some long-standing problems in Boston.
That's right.
Start with the achievement gap, because you're working on that. There's been some progress, but what do we really need to do
Well,
now?
I think, you know, some of the greatest progress around the achievement gap is just shining the light and really having more awareness about how large the gap is. So we actually have about a 30-point gap between African American and Latino students and their white and Asian peers. And that gap is really fueled by a lack of opportunity. So it's really, you know, sort of looking at what are the opportunities that students of color are not getting or disproportionately not having access to in the same way that some of their more resourced peers are. So things such as advanced work classes. Who's getting into advanced work classes, who's not, who's taking more rigorous curriculum, who's taking college access courses that would make them prepared for college. These are some of the things we need to actually address. And then also looking at the social and emotional factors of, you know, actually students growing up in neighborhoods where they're experiencing trauma, seeing violence at higher rates. We need to have more of a social and emotional learning component that's embedded throughout the curriculum. So those are some of the types of things that the Achievement Gap Task Force will start to address in the coming year.
What about that expanding the access to advanced work classes? Because I know a lot of people don't like tracking, but on the other hand, you got to make this work for everybody. That doesn't sound too easy.
Well, it's not easy, and some folks are calling it the third rail in Boston. I mean, we really do have a two-tiered system. With the advanced work classes, you're actually tracked into advanced work in 4th grade. So it's a test that you're taking in elementary school that really sort of determines the path that you'll be on for the rest of your career in school. And we know that when you look at the exam schools, that that's a whole separate track of students that are at Boston Latin and Latin Academy and the O'Brien compared to many of our high schools in Boston. So what Dr. Chang is saying is, you know, let's not throw out completely the system. Let's look at the seats and let's figure out how do we make this a more accessible system? How do we make sure that more students are able to get into advanced work classes, and that the gateway in 4th grade is not really the only opportunity that you have? And more importantly, how do you take the curriculum that's advanced work and make sure all students are getting that same rigorous curriculum at whatever school you're attending?
Another thing that Boston's been struggling with for a long time is teacher diversity, especially for black teachers. We've been losing ground. So what has to be done? It's
interesting because there was the Judge Garrity order many years ago, back in the 70s, that said we wanted to have at least 25% black teachers and an additional 10% teachers of color. That was the bar. But that was in a time when the district itself was not that diverse. We had maybe about 22% students of color in the district at that time when that court order came about. Today you have about 80% students of color. So you could say, really, we need even more teachers of color than what we're even setting as the bar, as the standard. But we're really losing ground going in the wrong direction. So repeatedly, year after year, the district has struggled to find more teachers of color. And then worse yet, they're not retaining the existing teachers of color that they have. So they're losing teachers that are going to charter schools, going to other districts, teachers who are retiring or going into other fields altogether. So it's really going to take a very rigorous effort with the Human Capital Department, Office of Human Capital, really sort of looking at the strategies that they're using to recruit and retain talented individuals of color, and then to really create some homegrown teachers of color. So they're starting to look in your high schools and look in your colleges, and how do we start to groom this next generation of young people who even want to be teachers?
Of course, the plans right now are for more middle school students in 7th grade to start using the T instead of yellow school buses. There's been a study, there's a problem with tardiness, concerns about sexual harassment of girls. So what do you think?
Well, this is an issue that the NAACP engaged in very early on. There was an original plan 2 years ago to put 8th graders and 7th graders on the T. There was no preliminary study. It does save money, right? But we said, do we want to save money or do we want to save lives? Do we want to have students who have to cross, geographical barriers across neighborhoods, who may have to deal with bullying issues, deal with different sexual harassment issues? We've already heard from many middle school girls who were saying they're getting the cat calls, having, men just standing on the street corners saying inappropriate things to them. And one of the things we're pleased to see is that the district did take our concerns seriously. There was a coalition of advocacy groups, so it was Black Educators Alliance of Massachusetts, Mass Advocates, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, all coming together to say, slow down, let's put a more thoughtful process in place. So they started with 8th graders last year. This year, moving on with the 7th graders. I would say it's too soon. I would say we do need more data. I would say early evidence from parents is saying that we need to get more parent feedback, parent surveys, student surveys to really understand the impact of having just the 8th graders on the T. But if they are going to move forward, as they plan to do when school opens next week, at least now they have a more thoughtful plan in place in the way that they're working with the Boston Police Department as well as with the MBTA to really try to ensure safety for our kids.
It looks as if Boston might be getting a little more charter school expansion than we expected a few months ago. Plus, there's this count of, 4,000 plus empty seats in the district public schools. So what do we need to do?
Well, there's been a real call as we look at the budget deficits year after year that the district needs to right-size our schools. And so what they're really saying there is that we have these empty seats. The empty seats have been created by students who have left Boston Public Schools to go to charter schools, or they're leaving the city of Boston altogether, or they're going to private schools and parochial schools. It's a real issue. Charter schools provide a quality education for our young people, but we can't forget that there's 57,000 students who are in school right in the Boston Public School system. That's where we need to focus the energy and the effort in terms of making sure that those schools, where the majority of our students are receiving their education, are the best and brightest schools that we can offer.
Finally, one long-time source of frustration is voc ed in Boston at Madison Park.
Yes.
Are we turning the corner, maybe?
I'm hopeful that we're turning the corner. We have new leadership at Madison Park, so going hand in hand with new leadership with our superintendent. We have a new principal, new headmaster, new executive director. And Madison is really at the center of the high school redesign plan. So that's an initiative that's coming from the Boston Public Schools, but also in partnership with the mayor's office and the mayor's chief of education. And so really looking at how do we redesign Madison to be the state-of-the-art vocational ed program that we know it can be. And the corporations in Boston are taking notice, and foundations are standing at the ready, and they're ready to make those investments and to really come together and collaborate in some impactful ways to make a difference. So I'm optimistic as to what's ahead for Madison.